My name is Carl Smallwood. I'm a co-director of the Divided Community Project, and I would like to welcome you this morning to our conversation. And thank you very much for joining us this morning to talk about some of the issues that we're all concerned about. Over the course of the last few months, this combination of COVID, issues of race and equity, campaign rhetoric, and the importance, the almost existential importance people have placed on this presidential election have made it so important that people of good conscience and people of faith speak up and speak out to help our communities. And we gather here today, within hours of the two-year anniversary of the synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh, Tree of Life shooting. And Commander Lando is with us today, and our thoughts are with him, as with all who remember that day. But we want to talk to you for just a minute about how important it is to speak out clearly and quickly when we see things that we may have an opportunity to influence and to help our community. And so that's what we're going to be doing over the course of the next hour and a half. We're going to be listening to you and learning from you and hoping to share a few things that we have thought about related to those issues. The next three speakers you're going to hear are members of the executive committee of the Divided Community Project. And I thought the first person that would be helpful to you is Bill Froelich, who's the deputy director, and he'll just give you a brief synopsis of what we do at the Divided Community Project.
Well, thank you all for being here this morning. We're really thrilled to meet with so many faith leaders. The idea of the Divided Community Project is to support communities that are focused and interested in transforming division into forward-looking action. We do that through a number of tools by hosting seminars like this. We just had one for bar leaders across the country, and this one for faith leaders. And we post all of our tools and make them freely accessible using a Creative Commons license, so anyone can use them, reuse them, or modify them. And we'll be posting some of the videos from this conversation on the website today. But what we hope to do is to help communities bring diverse groups of stakeholders together to identify and address divisions in their community that tear at the fabric of those communities, and to support those communities in addressing them by using mediation and dispute resolution tools that we're trained in at the Moritz College of Law. We are not subject matter experts. You are in your communities, but we hope to support your communities by coming to your shoes, by living in your worlds, and support you with process ideas to make more resilient communities that can respond to divisions and protests and perhaps identify them before something devastating happens in their community. I'll turn it back to Carl, and we'll put a few links in the chat function about the project.
Thank you, Bill. I think Nancy is going to speak to us next about some of the process that we'll be involved in. So Nancy? Nancy is one of the co-founders with Josh Stulberg, who you hear from next, and is one of the guiding lights of the Divided Community Project.
Well, good morning, everyone, and good morning, lots of old friends who I see out there, and as well as people I hope will be new friends. As we've worked with communities around the country, we have heard from leader after leader. When I made that statement, I wish I would have thought of something that I really knew. When it's important to speak out, as it may be, none of us can predict what's going to happen in our country in the coming weeks. But when it's important to speak out, it is very helpful. They kept saying to us, if you have some function to play, do this. Tell leaders it's very helpful to think ahead and make a kind of a checklist that works for you in the setting that you might be in. And so what we're going to suggest during this opening panel is that each of you write down, as you listen to the others talk about what happened in Pittsburgh and Sanford, around the country, if you could make notes of things, ideas that make sense to you in a particular scenario, depending on what happens. And then we'll have a breakout group in which you can share, small groups in which you can share these ideas with each other. You may be able to make suggestions to each other. Then again, a large group where we'll share together some of the trends that we've heard in the various breakout groups and talk about them. But the idea, just as it was with the checklist that we sent out to you when you registered, the idea is to get you thinking. We have confidence that you are people who, if you speak out at the right time, in the best ways, will have a positive effect on the larger community, on your members, but also the larger community. So that's our pitch is, rather than answering email during the panel, if you could take these notes that you can use in your breakout sessions to make those dynamic for each of you, then we think that this could be a useful hour and a half for you. Josh.
Thank you, Nancy. I have the privilege of introducing the four persons who will constitute our panel and provide lead-off comments for each of us. Each has had a distinguished career, continuing career actually, helping communities in critical and divisive moments. Gran Lum is now provost at Menlo College, was director of the U.S. Department of Justice Community Relations Service, was active in multiple communities throughout our country, from Ferguson to Sanford, Florida, a few years before that, after the killing of Trayvon Martin. And Sanford is now considered the birthplace of the Black Lives Matter movement. Reverend Valerie Walker is now presiding elder of the Orlando area of the AME Church, was asked to help convene clergy following that shooting of Trayvon and to co-chair the Blue Ribbon Task Force on the Sanford Police Department practices that was created following that matter. Commander Jason Lando was the first Pittsburgh law enforcement officer to arrive after the shootings at the Tree of Life Synagogue, where both he and his grandfathers are also members of that synagogue. And Rob Solomon has dealt with student issues related to diversity and inclusion, both at The Ohio State University and now at Case Western Reserve University. Case Western Reserve, where he is currently vice president, and Rob is also an associate pastor. Look forward to hearing from them.
Well, thank you, Josh, for those introductions. Let me begin our conversation, Grand, with you. Imagine a situation in which the outcome of the elections on November 3rd are still unclear after a few weeks. The parties, Republicans and Democrats, are exchanging different views, different narratives of what occurred in the voting, litigation's pending, allegations are swirling that our public safety forces haven't handled the demonstrations that follow appropriately. What are some ideas for how faith leaders might be helpful during this time?
So thank you, Carl. One thing I would say, maybe it's not so hard to imagine it, which is we are talking about it today here. And I want to say good morning. It is good to see some familiar faces and some new faces as well. I hope you don't mind. I'm having a little coffee at 7 a.m. here on the West Coast, so I need a little bit of a wake up this morning. But as Josh mentioned, I had the experience of working at the Department of Justice at an agency called the Community Relations Service. One of my former colleagues, Thomas Battles, who some of you know, is also on the line today. For those of you who don't know, it was created by the 1964 Civil Rights Act and worked in racial conflicts throughout the country. And as Josh mentioned, in my time at CRS, we had a number of incidents, a number of tragedies in Sanford, and Reverend Valerie Walker will be talking about that, because I actually think that is one of the best examples in the time that I was at CRS of how faith leaders made a huge difference in a situation. So I think I'm very much looking forward to hearing Reverend Walker speak on that. But what I would say is I noticed in nearly all the major situations, and this includes Baltimore after Freddie Gray, this includes Ferguson after Michael Brown. This includes one of the first situations that I worked in when I came to Department of Justice, which is Oak Creek, Wisconsin. Some of you may remember there was a Sikh Gurdwara where a white nationalist came in and shot several folks there. And the tools that Bill have sent to you, the one I want to focus on for just a moment is the very first one, respond early. And in Oak Creek, it was absolutely crucial that the local U.S. attorney got involved very quickly. It was very important that CRS responded very quickly in talking to faith leaders all over the country. There was a network where they reached out to folks who from the Sikh religion, from the Muslim religion. There was concerns around copycats. There was concerns around, was there a second shooter in the situation? And having folks go out and speaking, faith leaders go out and speaking to their brothers and sisters at Gurdwaras and other houses of worship was important there. In Baltimore, after Freddie Gray, one thing that we noticed, and Thomas came down there with me, we had a fairly large contingent that went down there. Many of the Black churches volunteered very quickly to do something called self-marshaling. There were many protests, and to help keep the protests safe, I was really struck. I think we had like 40 folks from churches, mostly Black churches, who came in to help facilitate those protests, who very quickly got in, and it made such a huge difference as well. So, you know, it goes to the faith leader's role as an upstander, what I call an upstander versus a bystander, right? The idea that how to step in and make a difference here. And you know, one of the other pieces that we're going to talk about, and I'll leave it to some of my colleagues, is basing your mission in faith and traditions and history. I'll leave it to some of my colleagues to talk further about that. But certainly what I saw was how does the golden rule plays out. It certainly exists in nearly every major religion, in every form of spirituality, whether Christianity and for the Muslim religion, in the Jewish faith. And I saw that play out in a number of situations. I want to certainly turn it back to Carl and to take the conversation further. I've had the privilege over the last couple of years of working with the Center for Nonviolence and Social Justice, started by Clarence Jones, who was Martin Luther King's attorney, and have had the chance to be a part of and moderate conversations between Andrew Young, Reverend Andrew Young, Reverend C.T. Vivian, with Black Lives Matter folks. And the conversation is really interesting. And I would point to the framing, how to think about the framing. What I was struck by sitting with these incredible icons and pioneers was how clear they were at the time of the civil rights era around love, around the idea of what is the purpose for why we are doing this, and what is the goal that we are trying to reach, and seeing the conversation with young activists and seeing how there are clearly differences, but there are clearly some similarities. And I think your role as you go out there, there is such opportunity to speak, to say, what do we share here? How do we come together here? And I think that's such an important role for all of you. And as Carl was saying, we have a presidential election in a week here, and how do we bring folks who are so polarized politically? There is a way in which I think faith is an important counterweight to what's going on there. So let me pause there and turn it back to Carl.
Right, and I'm going to pick it up. Thanks, Grand. Grand was our founding director and chairs our steering committee, and so we have been guided a great deal by his wisdom, and you should feel free as we have time to ask him questions. But he mentioned the huge difference that Reverend Valerie Walker made in Sanford. Sanford's often thought of, Sanford, Florida, the Trayvon Martin shooting site, as where Black Lives Matter began. But we think of it primarily as the place that, though a small town, handled tens of thousands of demonstrators with no violence and with no arrests, with the demonstrations continuing over months and even years. And so with that, Valerie, could you tell us the ways in which the faith leaders contributed in positive ways in Sanford?
Yes, good morning, and good morning to each of you in your respective places. And I see from Sanford, Brother Andrew Thomas and Reverend Marvin Scott, and also Thomas Battles, who had a great part in making sure the faith leaders were progressive and in a protection mode for not only the citizens, but for the city. And so first of all, I think we would be able to say to be already organized. The Sanford community was already organized with the ministerial allowance from the city, as well as the ministerial allowance from the African American community. So we were already organized, and I think that is key in any city or community, is to have great organization. So because of the great organization with not only the city ministerial allowance, the African American ministerial allowance, the NAACP, a group called Concerned Citizens, and the think tank that was already in place. So that's 5 organizations. The city manager was on board, the city mayor was on board, and the community liaison leader. So we already had all of that in place, working on many issues that was already going on in the city. If I summarize what I've already said, would be an organized community, partnerships, the Department of Justice, and then make sure you are in a prayerful mode. Of course, faith leaders, we always pray, but you have to pray more during these situations. You have to come together, and you also have to want everybody to be protected, not only the people, but the property. And it is so important that the faith leaders make sure you preach this and speak this out to your parishioners. Therefore, if everyone is speaking the same language, and then you get the same results. And then the other thing, I love my P's, was progress. You gotta wanna make sure that you are progressive, and that the progress is not only for that moment, but the progress is ongoing. It must be someone who's feel they're called, they're compassionate, they're concerned, they're caring, and you create an atmosphere for continuance. And many times that is the disconnect in a lot of the communities where there's no continuous. You have a group, you meet, and then nothing else happens. So you have to have leaders who are passionate about the cause and to move forward. I hope I answered your question. If not, you may ask me questions and I can then reiterate some of the things that I've said. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Reverend Walker. Commander Lando, it's hard for us to envision and understand the range of feelings you must have had as you arrived at the Tree of Life Synagogue on that tragic day. In the days that followed, in the midst of the grief, outrage, and fear, can you tell us how you believe faith leaders make positive contributions to community conversations and moving ahead?
Thank you. And also thanks for having me here today. This is my first time with this group. So some other folks this morning talked about familiar faces. No faces here are familiar to me, but I hope moving forward that's not the case and I get to know everyone a little better. Yeah, we saw something, we're in such a divisive time right now. Everyone kind of goes to their corners and they tend to only associate with people of their, same views, whether it's faith or, politics or whatnot. And it's sad that it took a tragedy like the Tree of Life to change that, but we saw the city come together in a way that I don't recall it ever had come together previously. Just a few examples. The Islamic community came out and started a fund that actually paid for the burial costs for the 11 victims of the synagogue shooting. Prior to that, people would just have an idea in their mind of that there's Islamophobia, and people of different faiths don't always see eye to eye or get along. But I thought that was so powerful that, in the days following that, the community as a whole of all faiths all came together to support each other, whether it was food or financial needs. The Tree of Life, because of the ongoing litigation and whatnot, I can't speak to specifics, but from a personal note, my grandfather, he went there every single day for the morning minyan, what they call a minyan. And in the days following that, he said, where are we going to go? We don't have a synagogue anymore. And a Methodist or Presbyterian, I can't recall which one, church opened up its doors. And so our Jewish brothers and sisters were going to a Presbyterian or a Methodist church in the same neighborhood to hold their services. You just don't ever see stuff like that happening, and it's sad that it took a tragedy like that to bring everyone together. But I think, at least in Pittsburgh, we have a new appreciation for each other's faiths, and we realize that people might all pray to a different God, but in times of tragedy, we all lean on each other, and it doesn't matter what our faith is. So that was something really nice to see, just everyone coming together. And Valerie and Gran both really hit on some important points when we talk about tragedies like this. Preparing ahead of time is so important. Too often we always say, well, we should really meet and discuss how we're going to react in case something tragic happens, and we don't do it until something tragic happens. So really coming together on a regular basis ahead of time and being prepared is so important. And then the other thing that I think that Valerie just touched on, which I thought was really important, was staying on top of issues. We come together all the time. Oh, there was this terrible tragedy. Let's come together. Let's talk about what we can do. And then it just kind of goes away, and there's no follow through. We see that a lot. I'm not just speaking about faith-based issues, but in community, whether it's talking about issues in neighborhoods, people have great ideas and they come to the table and they talk about them, and we make a checklist, and then it just kind of fizzles out. So really being intentional about staying on top of things, I think is so important, because it's going to happen again. And if we don't address it, we don't stay on top of it, we're going to be right back in the same place the next time a tragedy strikes. So.
Thank you, Commander Lando. Rob, let me turn to you. You wear two hats, both as a faith leader and as a university administrator. And in that second role, I know you've had to draft statements for college presidents, deans, for yourself in the midst of anger, outrage, fear. What do you consider when you're drafting a statement and framing the issues, helping people understand each other, offer constructive ways for people to direct their energy and help them heal, and letting them know that you understand their viewpoints?
Yes, Carl, you really zeroed in on a number of those things, and they're also replicated in the resources that the Divided Community Project actually provides. And the first thing you mentioned was framing, and really getting down to the core and the values of what the issues are, particularly if it's all wrapped in political ideology and what I would call a lot of white noise surrounding what the real issues are. Because when we get to the core issues, I think that people can relate to it more effectively. And so when I think of writing a message, I want to do that. And one of the other things that's mentioned is about expanding understanding across those divisions. And so one of those things that I try to stay abreast of is other perspectives, right? And even if at the end of the day we have to take a particular stand, understanding the other perspectives, I think, can help us in shaping the things that we say, and because then we can find what those common core, those core issues that we share, right? And in many cases, there's some people who disagree on how to get to the solutions, but in fact, we share the same core values. And I think that when those are common, you try to encapsulate those things, but also inviting collaboration, right? That's another tool that can be used. And that is, whatever statement is made, try to encourage discourse, encourage dialogue, and a way to come together. And I will add this sort of on a personal level. I think that if someone is feeling hurt or oppressed or disrespected or abused or whatever the case might be, I do think it's important to acknowledge that pain, to recognize that it is real and that those feelings are legitimate and real. To the extent that the writer can relate personally, I think that should be part of it. And acknowledging it. I would say this isn't really the time to write a press release where you have this political I mean, we've seen them all, political statements that really say nothing, but it should be heartfelt. And if there is any accountability there, then I think that there needs to be a willingness to admit what that accountability is from whatever perspective you're in. So, acknowledging the problem, framing it, admitting that we really want to work on this, or we're committed to doing better together. And I think that a message of pulling together and working together is important, so that those people, whoever that is in the moment, who are feeling hurt, making sure that they feel heard and they feel there are alternatives to moving forward.
I want to go back to something both Grand and Valerie mentioned, and that is the way in which there can be more power in speaking together. We certainly, all of you have the opportunity and are constantly thinking about speaking to your members, but combinations of clergy, combinations of clergy with other community leaders. Valerie, why don't you begin, Reverend Walker, with some ways in which it helps to make the statements jointly?
Well, I think the ways that helps to make the statements jointly is, first of all, knowing that it's for the unified cause. It's the persons coming together to encourage one another to embrace the same ideas, have a meeting of the minds and a meeting of the hearts. Once you're able to meet and do that, and as I said earlier, Department of Justice, they really came together to help us come together. We had two different ministerial allowances. We had the City of Sanford Ministerial Allowance, and then we had the African American Ministerial Allowance, which was two separate entities. But coming together and marching together and meeting together and praying together and having press conferences together and having events together, the togetherness connected us. And when you have a connection, the communication is so much better. So whenever we spoke, we were speaking as a unified front, as opposed to a race or a religion or a community area. We were just the City of Sanford faith leaders together for that cause. And so I think is so important. And then when you have active listeners on both sides, and then you're able to have a lot of progress. And we were very progressive. And some of the changes are still moving forward today. A lot of the changes took place. A lot of good things came out of us being able to unite and to connect and to communicate and move forward.
Thank you, Valerie. And Grand, Provost Lum, you had the view of that around. Can you suggest ways in which collaborations, in which post-election, it might be really effective?
Sure. And I certainly remember when Reverend Walker, when Thomas Battles, that was so powerful when you had white and black pastors who historically didn't come together, who went to the Zimmerman trial every day. I mean, there was something about that joint power that was terrific. When Jason talked about what happened at Pittsburgh and the Tree of Life Synagogue, it certainly made me think that a very similar thing happened in Oak Creek, right? For those who are Sikh and those who are in a minority community in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, the coming together, the joint work that other faiths did that made folks from a Sikh background and the community as a whole come together in a very troubling moment. So that to me is, again, I think another an important example of when tragedy strikes to step in, right? It's not just, oh, only folks who are from that religion should be speaking up. It should be folks from different faiths who can speak up, because that sends a powerful message, I think, to your point, Nancy, to the extent that people from different faiths do it. And this could be in a variety of ways. It's certainly, it could be in a joint editorial, right? This is a moment where I think that can be done. It can be, one of the things that we talk about in our tools is using multiple media. I don't use TikTok, but if anyone wants to jointly come together in TikTok, that might be powerful as well. It made me think of something. Again, this is from maybe a different time, but I think, Nancy, you talked about how it's not just people from different faiths. It may be working with different people that you might not normally work with. And I think there is that power, right, to come together with secular leaders in some form. I certainly remember, and this is from a different time, but when there was the protesting and the violence in Ferguson, and Eric Holder, the Attorney General, then had to make a decision to whether to come or not, and the great risk that the writing might get worse. We helped set up, the Department of Justice and Community Relations Service helped set up these meetings for him to come. It was very important to set up a meeting, and we had to do it very carefully with faith leaders in the area. And that sent an important message for that day. And it went through the community, and I remember how risky that night felt. Like I was unclear what was going to happen, and that was the first night in like 11 nights where there wasn't violence and where there was calm in the community, and because faith leaders, and in this case a political leader, came together to make that sort of difference.
We don't know what's likely to happen in the coming weeks, what will occur. Your campus actually hosted, and I know you were involved in the first presidential debate. I don't think any of us expected it to go forward that way. But is there anything faith leaders in particular can do now? We've heard several references to the importance of planning ahead, not just responding to, but planning ahead. Are there things up through next week, but more importantly in the next several months, that faith leaders can be doing now so we'll be ready to meet things that we have challenges in envisioning?
Yes. It's interesting because I'm moving between working in the academic space and also, from the faith leader perspective. And hopefully the first thing I think is making sure that the messages from the pulpit to the congregation are messages that take us back to our faith foundations. And many of the issues, and unfortunately, there's some polarization within people of faith in terms of what we should be doing. I think that if we go back to the core issues of Scripture, then we can see that that notions of equality and love and justice, that all those issues are rooted in Scripture. And so, to the extent that the messages from the pulpit reiterate those concepts, I think that's powerful. And continuing to do that thematically is important. But also connected to that in terms of teaching is also reminding us, we're talking to faith leaders, so people of faith, reminding us that who is ultimately in control. And I think that you have to build on the faith foundation that no matter what happens, that we have a creator that is in control and that will provide and protect. And I think that fortifying the faith of the congregants is really a part of the preparation, because of that can have an impact on the emotional toil that an election one way or the other will take. But the other part is engaging in partnerships and planning them, and hopefully having done that already, but if not, developing partnerships, and in two ways: community organizations that support collaboration and peace, and harmony, working with those organizations, those that may also be there to kind of help steady where everyone's going, but also across those lines. We still know that there's a lot of separation based upon race within churches, and then certainly there are different faiths, but try to find ways to cross those lines. What can we do together? We don't have to agree on all doctrine, but we can serve together. We can do a clothing drive together. We can do a food drive together. We can help meet the needs of the community. The consistent common mission, I think, can help to steady us. And then the third thing, I think, is that each faith leader should think about their work as a city of refuge. What can we provide to our communities that says that we're a place of comfort? In some cases, it might be providing essential needs to people in the community more broadly, because that sense of stress and desperation can be buttressed by knowing that there is a place I can go for support and help. But also substantively, and that's another way to come together, offer our facilities as a place where people can come together. And I know that's difficult during COVID, but there are some creative things that we can do. And also sponsoring sessions, sponsoring opportunities for continued dialogue, where we can continue to talk. No matter what, let's not stop. Let's continue the engagement. Let's continue the conversations and lay the foundation for our engagement going forward. And that's what we're actually doing on campus. We're trying to provide support services. We're trying to provide education. Wellness is a big part of what we're doing. And I also think that faith leaders can be a part of those things in the community in the same way we're thinking about it on campus.
Thank you, Rob. And that's a wonderful transition. Jason, I want to talk to you for a minute about healing. And in the wake of the Tree of Life synagogue shooting, the way events like that tear at trust in the institutions and safety in our community. And in those circumstances, communities either come together or they fracture and they grow apart. What can faith leaders do to heal after a terrible event like that?
Well, the one thing that immediately strikes me, and I know that I believe it was Robert that's just touched on it, is the one thing faith leaders are good at doing is just finding common ground between everybody. We, like I said earlier, we have, everyone has different things that are important to them. And sometimes those things cause a division in communities, and we tend to label each other and paint each other with a broad brush. And you're a Democrat and you're a Republican and you're liberal and you're this and you're that. But I think the one thing, in my prior assignment, I spent 5 years as a commander of a district that had a lot of mistrust and a lot of division between police and community and the communities themselves. And we worked really closely with our faith leaders because they were the ones that everybody respected. No matter if you were Republican, Democrat, what your personal feelings were on certain issues, they were the uniters in the community. They brought everyone together. So I really do think Robert hit the nail on the head, finding those opportunities to collaborate and to invite people that sometimes have very diverging viewpoints and bring them together in support of a common mission or a common goal. So, with Tree of Life, it was, how are we going to support, the families, whether it's financially, whether it was providing like food or an alternate place to worship. And no matter what people felt, what their different viewpoints were, everybody saw that the faith leaders were coming together, and they rallied around them and said, we'll offer whatever support is needed. So I think that, just looking for those opportunities to bring people together. I just wanted to touch on something we did in Pittsburgh that I think was really cool. We had been planning it for a long time. It's not something you could roll out overnight or before the election. But I was part of a team in Pittsburgh that built designed what's called the Procedural Justice Unit for the city police. And it was a 3-year initiative where we trained all of our police officers basically in the concepts of procedural justice. Basically, when you're out there interacting with the community, you can still do your job, you can still be a police officer, but the way you interact with people and the way you treat people is paramount in any situation. And so part of that training was implicit bias training as well. And after we trained all of the officers, we went to the faith community and we said, we'd love to do this training between the police officers and the community, and our faith leaders loved the idea, and they started hosting these trainings, these weekend sessions at churches all over the city. And our team would go, and we would bring police officers with us. And you can have police officers or not. For us, it was important because we were trying to bring police and community together, but it could also just be for bringing different communities together that don't always see eye to eye. And we did a day-long workshop at churches all over the city for a couple years. It still continues today, but not as much. And we really talked about, where some of these biases come from and how we can overcome them and how we can see beyond the labels that we paint each other with or that we put on each other.
Yeah.
And the whole purpose of this workshop is you leave at the end of the day realizing that no matter where we come from, what neighborhood, what our skin color is, what our religion is, we are all more alike than we are different. And the important thing is trying to find that common ground. And so the implicit bias training sessions we did at the churches, I mean, we had people in predominantly Black neighborhoods come to these churches, Black churches, from all over the county, from suburban, predominantly white churches, people. We had Republicans, Democrats. I mean, people were all coming together to sit and just get to know each other on a personal level. And you just saw from that, it kind of organically developed that people were supporting each other. We had some people from the suburban churches come and help plant a community garden in the inner city. I mean, some of these people have probably never been to these neighborhoods before, but by doing that proactive work on the front end and helping everyone see each other as human beings, we kind of broke down some of those silos, and people were able to, build those relationships that I know in times of crisis will prove to be invaluable.
You use the word healing, and I got where you're coming from, but for a lot of these pastors, it's not about healing, it's about understanding. When we were in Sanford, it really wasn't about healing. It was about understanding each other before they moved forward together. Because they weren't really mad with each other. They just didn't know each other. And they had to come together to work for a common purpose. So, because they had different views. And there was a great community. And there were a lot of pastors. You had Pastor Valerie Walker. And she was an African-American woman ministering to a community. And she was a female. And there are a lot of male pastors that wouldn't deal with a female pastor. And so they had to deal with a female pastor that in many of those clergies wouldn't let a female pastor in their pulpit to minister to a clerk, to a membership. So they had to understand each other. So they weren't mad with each other. They had to understand each other. And they had to understand the needs of the people that they ministered to. They had to understand this issue of white privilege. They had to understand when Zimmerman took that shot, and we had to say, you're going to sit behind Zimmerman and you're going to sit behind the Trayvon Martin family, and it doesn't matter what your position is. The goal is, how do you keep Sanford from burning? So we had to get them to say, yes, we're going to work together for a common cause, and that is your community. So they weren't mad with each other, they just had to understand each other. So we worked together for a common cause. So they trained and they worked together. We had people to bring them together. They trained on how to speak to the press, and they did that on the unit, and they agreed on a common goal. So they saw pain, they heard pain, and they spoke to that pain in their community. So they weren't mad with each other. They had to understand each other. And I think that's where we got to go as we look at the elections. How do you deal with what's coming? How do you deal with differences? How do you deal with hate that's coming down the road? And speak to that in this era. Because we got a lot of young people that want it and they want it now. And how do you deal with that in this era that we're dealing with? In this era of COVID and technology. And I think that's where we've got to go in this era that we're dealing with now.